It was so traumatic. We visited 33 addresses on that first day, and of the 33 addresses, 10 of the pensioners had died in the last 2 months. After 6 months working in the Ural Mountains in Yekaterinburg, delivering a distribution project for the Department of Defense, I went back to Moscow to see my humanitarian aid boss. It was the end of my contract. I had 2 more months to go before I went back to Manchester University to finish my degree. And he offered me a 1-month extension, during which I did final reports for the whole project throughout all 12 republics. And that, to me, was actually, looking back, super interesting. I got to travel a lot around the former Soviet Union, and it was also my first ever paid writing gig, I guess, looking back. And then he was pleased with that, so I got 1 more month, where at the age of 24 I was sent down to the Caucasus for the first time, and I did 2 weeks as a logistics assistant in Tbilisi in Georgia, about which I don't remember too much, apart from the wonderful hospitality of the Georgian people. And then I had 2 weeks in Yerevan in Armenia, which will stay with me forever. So we flew down, and I remember arriving at night at Erebuni Airport, which I think is the military airport there, in complete darkness. All the lights were off, and I'd come into a country that was in a real crisis. There was a conflict with Azerbaijan, the neighbour next door, over the enclave of Nagorno-Karabakh. To the left they had their neighbours were Turkey, where there was a genocide, if I'm allowed to call it that, back in 1915, and that border was closed, and Mount Ararat, which is the symbol of Armenia, is there in Turkey. Below they had Iran, and they had a lifeline through Georgia up in the north. But there was a big blockade going on at the time, and there was no gas and very, very little electricity. We used to have 1 hour a day, and you never knew when it would come on. So we were sleeping in this building where we had the office as well, and we would go to sleep with our lights switched on just in case the electricity came on during the night, and it did quite often at 3 o'clock in the morning. And at that point everybody would just run to the office at 3 in the morning and recharge laptops and send faxes to Moscow and stuff like that. And so it was a real emergency, and my job down there for 2 weeks, I was sent down with no real training or preparation, and I was told to conduct a survey of the 734 Armenian pensioners who had been recipients of a pilot project to distribute kerosene stoves and kerosene, because basically they had no heating in their apartments, and the temperatures then were getting down to like -30, as what I was told, and some of them were even freezing to death in their beds. And this was just after the Soviet Union had collapsed, so the whole social welfare infrastructure had all collapsed, and pensions, when they got paid, were about $7 a month. And so the idea was to bring these stoves in, and they would help for cooking and also for heating, and then to fly in the kerosene to fuel them as airline fuel. And this had been done about 2 or 3 months before my arrival, and my job was to devise a survey and then go up and meet as many of these pensioners as I could, and then do a report with recommendations for a wider project which they wanted to implement with about 10,000 stoves to more beneficiaries. I was given one assistant, Manoush, a lovely young Armenian girl who spoke good English, and off we went. And so I spent the first day putting together the survey, asking for some advice from my new colleagues down in the office. And basically, I then went off with Manoush. We had a list of addresses, and it was so traumatic. We visited 33 addresses on that first day, and of the 33 addresses, 10 of the pensioners had died in the last 2 months. Some of them from malnutrition, some of them were actually frozen, and some of them had just given up on a will to live. And it got to the stage where we were knocking on our door, and just hearing the sound of somebody shuffling inside just calmed us down, because we would knock on a door and then eventually a neighbour would come out and say, "Oh, sorry, they died like a month ago." And I remember we went up to this one woman, and she was in her 70s, 80s, and she was on the 5th floor of this apartment building. There was no electricity, there was no lift. And we got there, we went in, it was a beautifully decorated apartment, lots of wonderful ornaments. She had accolades from her career in the civil service or whatever. Very, very proud, but absolutely no money and no food. And so we went in, and she said, "Oh, can I offer you something?" And she offered us a cup of tea. And one of the questions I was asking was, "How many meals do you have a day?" And the answer for her was 2, and she said, I have a piece of bread in the morning with a cup of tea, and then I have a cup of tea in the evening, and that was pretty much all she had. And one of the other questions I asked was, have you received humanitarian aid from anywhere else? Because we wanted to make sure we weren't overlapping with other aid agencies to be more targeted. And her eyes brightened, and she said, yes, I have, it's amazing. And I was really grateful, and I still have it. And I said, okay, well, what did you get out of interest? And she said, I'll show you. And so she shuffled off, and she came back 2 minutes later, and literally beaming from ear to ear at the sort of generosity of what she had. And she had a 1 kilo tin of salted potatoes. And she says, I'm saving this for when I'm really, really, really desperate. And as we left, she said, wait a minute. And she got a newspaper, and then she lit it, and she said, this will give you enough light just to get down to the bottom of the stairs, but run, So then we went down with this thing. And she was one of many, many people who were just really stuck. And, in the winter, it was super, super cold there. And so I went back to the office, and I was completely traumatized, and everybody else in the office had been working on other projects, and nobody was really quite aware. And I decided to write this report. I had to write this report to Moscow, and I wanted to send it by fax, but there was no electricity, and then the electricity came on at 2 o'clock in the morning, so I sent the fax, and it sent off alarm bells in Moscow, because they had no idea that the extent of the situation for these pensioners was as bad as it was. And as a result of that, we actually went on and put together a project to order 10,000 stoves, and there was only one place in the whole of the Soviet Union that could actually deliver that amount of stoves very, very quickly, and that was in Irkutsk by Lake Baikal in Siberia. And I managed, as my last job for this aid agency before I went back to the UK, to get a weekend in Lake Baikal to go and negotiate the purchase of those stoves. But that's another story for another time. If you've enjoyed this, thanks for watching. It's one of the chapters from my new book, Around the World in 80 Disasters. You can follow the video series if you subscribe to the channel. And also, if you want to buy the book, it's available on Amazon on paperback and on Kindle. And I'll leave a link to that in the comments. Thanks for watching.